Alan, welcome to the day that launches your Crackerjack book with a whole host of stars from the past. How does that feel for you?
It feels absolutely great, really. I mean, I've only saw the book a few maybe an hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
It looks great,
Oh, it does look.
yes, and I'm looking forward to the kind of reunion that will happen shortly.
Yes, it's going to be great having so many of the faces from the past here today, isn't it?
Yes, and we've got a nice spread over really all the periods. When you're talking about a show that ran from the mid-50s to the mid-80s, then you've got a lot of people to call upon, and luckily, a good number are coming here today.
We're very lucky today, it's fair to say. So firstly, why write a book about Crackerjack?
Well, it was a show I grew up with, and as a child, you wanted to watch television that didn't teach you anything. I mean, there was a lot of educational TV, but Crackerjack was just it was a children's variety show. It was the first children's variety show, and so there were comedians, there was a singer, there were the odd guests, pop groups, silent movies. It finished with a sketch where they all dressed up in historical costume and then started singing pop songs, and it was just a lovely tea time romp.
And how did you set about researching for the book?
Well, initially I think jotted down all I could find about the history over 29 years and the programs and who was involved in it, and then I started trying to trace as many of the people that were actually involved in it as possible, because I wasn't really interested in talking to the kind of people, the general TV experts or anyone that actually was possibly too young to remember it, but actually stars that were involved in it, either as performers or people that were involved behind the cameras, producers, writers, that type of thing. That's how I wanted to learn the story of it. And the great thing is, as I talked to everyone, everyone had great affection for it, and usually you talk to someone and they said, "Oh, you must talk to this person," and so they would it put you in contact with other performers.
And what's so special about Crackerjack for you?
I think it's a fun show. It goes at tremendous pace. I think I was always amazed. I mean, if it wasn't live, it was always recorded live. They never really kind of had chances to go over the bits that went wrong, so you just kind of soldiered on whatever. And I think it is amazing that the pace of some of those performers, it just gives it its energy.
Were there any surprises that you came across when writing the book?
I think it changed over the years, bit by bit, and there's a huge, great gap in the archives where there's kind of about 10 years missing. So sometimes I was looking at scripts, sometimes I was looking at the odd recordings or talking to people, and often every now and again it would just change a bit, and perhaps a new comedian came in and it would be finding its way for about a series, and then the following series they would really just shake up the show, and that just kind of worked.
So Crackerjack ran for 29 years. It's hard to believe actually now looking back. When did it start? What year?
Well, it started in 1955, which is really kind of quite early in television. They always say that the 1953 coronation was when people started buying their sets. And so 55 was early. Children's TV was really small studio-based stuff. So the idea of doing a variety show in the BBC Television Theatre in Shepherd's Bush, that was a new idea, a children's variety show. So we had Eamon Andrews presenting it, who was a huge star at the time, really having certainly a television personality, having done What's My Line and This Is Your Life. So he was a good person to have as the actual host of the show. And then there was a succession of comedians who were new to TV. There was Jack Douglas and Joe Baker, and Jack Douglas was the tall, straight man actually those days to Joe Baker, who was short and fat. Then we had Ronnie Corbett as the comedian, and again a new discovery. But when I started watching it, that was the Leslie Crowther and Peter Glaze era. Leslie Crowther being tall and thin, Peter Glaze short and fat, and Peter Glaze stayed on as the Stooge for nearly 20 years, on and off, mainly on. And Leslie Crowther, I think, particularly brought great energy to the show. He was a new discovery, but he became involved in the writing, and he really started the idea of the costume drama finales with the pop songs. And they had musical finales before, but not always with the songs that were in the charts at the time. And after Leslie Crowther, there were a number of other tall, thin comedians. They kept that kind of physical contrast going all the time, because there was Rod McLennan from Australia, and there was Don McLean, and then Bernie Clifton. And midway between these, actually after Rod McLennan left, there was a series with Little and Large. And this, through no fault of theirs, didn't go well, and it was really just, it was interesting interviewing them. I spoke to them both, and they were so upbeat about really what was a terrible time for them, because the scripts were wrong for them, and their agent had still booked them for all these northern clubs, because they were club performers. So they'd be rehearsing Crackerjack in the day in London, going up to the northern clubs, doing a late night cabaret engagement, snatching a couple of hours sleep, and then back down to London. And the 13-week series, really kind of nearly killed them, I think.
What will we discover if we read the book?
Well, I think hopefully you will discover the origins of the show, which are really quite interesting. And because we're going back to 1955, this is the kind of thing where you won't have seen any old recordings. But I think also it's the behind-the-scenes stuff, because I've talked to so many performers, an incredible amount of comedians and singers, and it's their stories of what went behind the scenes in trying to put together a live show. And there were, things went wrong. There were injuries, there were accidents, there were at one point a very, an illness so that someone couldn't go on, and it's how the producers coped with all this, really. But also, I think it's just the fun, the fun that continued. And by the 80s, it was a very different show when it was Stu Francis and Take a Letter and the Gunge Tanks. And the Gunge Tanks weren't first used on Noel Edmonds. Crackerjack was the first place to use the Gunge Tanks. So that was, and it was right. They wanted to keep evolving to survive as long as they did. And that was the way to go. Tiz was already on TV, so Gunge Tanks and Mess, that is definitely the way to go.
And what do you think, Alan, is the single most defining on-screen moment of the series?
Oh, the easy questions last, right? No, that is quite something. For me, my favourite moment, I think, one of the finale sketches. Was written by Tony Hare, who is here today. It was called The Fat Tum of the Opera. It was a parody of Phantom of the Opera. This was before Andrew Lloyd Webber got his hands on it, and as normally, that they integrated pop songs that were in the charts at the time, and top of the charts at the time was Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, and Jan and Don and Peter Glaze somehow did a live performance of this song with all the high and low Galileos and everything else, and I think it's an absolute triumph.
We've got quite a lineup of people here today, but some of the guys I'm sure you've interviewed can't make it. Did you do many of the interviews over telephone?
Yes, I did one from Italy, one from America, a Crackerjack hostess, Sally Ann Triplett, who was walking her dog in Central Park at the time, and that was a great interview. So that there's some people that I haven't met. A lot I have visited whenever possible, but I mean, there's a number of people that I haven't seen that are coming today, particularly three of the last Crackerjack hostesses who all worked with Stu Francis, Lee Miles and Sarah Hollandby, who I talked to over the phone, and Julie Dawn Brown, now known as Downtown Julie Brown, who I interviewed from her home in Italy, and she has flown in today, and that might be her now. No, she has flown in today, especially for this, to meet her fellow hostesses.
Alan, I think we've got a really exciting day ahead of us. I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks very much for spending some time with us and answering a few of our questions here today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks.